Hi, you've tuned in to Radio Northern Beaches, your Listen Local station, right here on the Northern Beaches of Sydney. You can find us on your radio dial at 88.7 and 90.3 FM. Can't get to a radio? No worries. You can always stream our program live from anywhere in the world at rnb.org.au. And for listening on your own schedule, our podcasts are available globally at rnbpodcast.com.au. So be sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Now, here is our latest podcast.
Welcome again, listeners, to Community Radio, Northern Beaches, 88.7 and 90.3 FM, streaming live, www.rnb.org.au. Our program is Community Voices. I'm Michael Lester, and if you'd like to catch up with previous versions of the many hundred fascinating conversations and discussions on this program of mine, Community Voices, you can just Google me for on-demand streaming. If you just Google Michael Lester Mixcloud, it should take you to the site with hundreds of these things. With those few words, living in the Northern Beaches as we do, we know that Sydney has among the most beautiful beaches in the world, and plenty of them, and many swimming venues to boot. And we also know that as a society and a culture, we're really taken, if not obsessed, by swimming as a recreation, in particular, swimming and surfing. That's our topic for today, because I'm delighted to welcome to our program our guest, who has written a book, which is a collection of charming essays and reflections going under the title Swimming Sydney, subtitled A Tale of 52 Swims. These are 52 swims around Sydney, as published by New South Press 2024. Our guest is Chris Baker, joining us on the line. Chris is a lifelong educator and writer, and he describes himself, not surprisingly, as a lifelong swimmer. So welcome to our program, Chris.
Thank you very much, Michael. Great to be with you.
Chris, what was the motivation for putting together a series, as you have here, of 52 essays on 52 selected swimming spots around Sydney? And what are you hoping to convey as a message about all this in your book?
Sure. So I guess the genesis for this book was standing ankle deep in a wedding, actually at Shelley Beach in the Northern Beaches, just around the corner from the main beach at Manly. And it got me thinking about, why is it that more of us don't take to the water, not just for recreational value, but for more meaningful value? So I was at this very beautiful wedding, and I started reflecting on what does the water mean to us as a society? How do we derive a sense of identity and a sense of our attachment to place from the water? And so after that event, I decided that I was going to, over the course of a calendar year, swim 52 swims. So one swim every week around different parts of Sydney. And I wanted to take in the length and the breadth of the city. So I went from Palm Beach to Cronulla, from Mount Druitt to Bondi, and everything in between. And I wanted to swim not only in our fantastic beaches and in our iconic rock pools, but also to go to a backyard pool, to go to municipal pools, to go to some of the wild swimming venues in places like the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury, and also just to get a sense of what it was that made water and swimming such an essential part of the Sydney identity, because I think it is a really key aspect of who we are as a people. And I think swimming plays a central part in the way that we form and nurture community, and the way that we see ourselves, and the way that we relate to each other. So I wanted to look at what pools and what swimming venues and beaches tell us about ourselves, about our history, about our culture, about our society. And I thought the best way to do that was literally to dive in and just to be open to whatever happened over the course of a year.
Yeah, well, you've certainly achieved that sort of series of reflections on our culture in these 52 very readable essays on 52 different locations. Interesting that it's prompted in the first essay in your book at Shelley Beach, as you say, to think about the significance or otherwise. I mean, we tend primarily, of course, as I think you say, to think of swimming, particularly in a recreational mode, an exercise mode. But this raises for you the question of our spiritual approach to these things. And I think that starts you thinking about some of the indigenous First Nations peoples and their attitudes towards the sea and the water. And you take this up at a couple of places in your essays. One of the places you visit where it comes up is Victoria Park, the pool at Sydney University.
Yeah, so that's a pool that's not too far from where I live. I'm based in Surrey Hills, close to Central Station. So Victoria Park Pool is a pool I swim at a lot. Interestingly, that area used to be called Blackwattle Bay, and it was a significant meeting point for Indigenous society. And I spoke to a Cooma man called Brett Levy, who's has this most amazing company called Virtual Songlines. He uses digital design to illustrate what Sydney looked like pre-invasion. And he talks about that area being a really significant crossroads. And a lot of the main arteries of Sydney today, Parramatta Road, City Road, these main streets that intersect the city and define the way that we traverse the city were songlines, if you like, were areas where people used to, First Nations people used to travel. And so at Victoria Park Pool, I was intrigued to think that it's a place where we have a festival on the 26th of January every year called the Yabun Festival, which is a festival of resilience and survival and that celebrates Indigenous culture as it is living today. But within the park itself, there's not a lot of acknowledgement of the fact that this was a really key area and an intersection point for First Nations people. And yet, ironically, there's a totem pole from a Canadian society that was given to Sydney in the 1960s, and there are other things that commemorate achievements in colonial society. There's a memorial to a gold medal yachting champion from the 1960s, but there's very little interpretation as this being a First Nations place that was significant. So it got me thinking about, I guess, what lies underneath the veneer of Western society and colonial Sydney, that underneath there's this bedrock of ancient First Nations culture. And we see it in things like the rock carvings in North Head at Bondi and in Ku-ring-gai National Park in the Northern Beaches. We see it in some of the cultural sites that we acknowledge around Sydney, but there's not a lot of commemoration in terms of the physical environment. So it got me thinking about, why was swimming important to First Nations people? What resonance did it have to their society? And what resonance does it have to continue to have with societies today, particularly in places like La Perouse, where you've got this very significant extended Indigenous presence, the Darawal people living in that part of Sydney, and that swimming and the water and the sea was and always has been a very important part of First Nations culture.
Yeah, well, I think at one point you say somewhere swimming is living, and swimming Sydney connects us with country, ourselves, and each other. It is a theme that comes through in these 52 essays in a very readable and informative way, without ever getting too bogged down in the metaphysics, I guess. You cover a lot of history too, interestingly, is prompted in your reflections as you go around your selection of 52. For example, you visit Little Bay Beach, is it, which is styled Exile and Quarantine, and you end up with a theme around isolation and regeneration in the last outpost of Sydney's civilization.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I like to say that for every kind of chapter in Sydney's history, both pre-invasion and post-invasion, there's a swimming yarn. And so pretty much you don't have to scratch too much to come up with the swimming story. I mean, there's a swimming bushranger who was the only person to ever escape from Cockatoo Island. He swam across the harbour. There's stories of the Edwardian social movements, and in fact, in the Northern Beaches, there's a character that's probably known to a lot of your listeners, William Gocher, who campaigned to allow for daylight swimming on public beaches. He was a newspaper man in Manly, and it was in the early 20th century that he led a social movement to allow us to swim in daylight hours. Prior to the early 1900s, that wasn't allowed. I mean, swimming was gender segregated, and it had to be either before dawn or after dusk, which seemed a bit crazy, when you think about sharks and rips and some of the perils of Sydney beaches. There's World War II stories that are connected to swimming, and a couple of them are personal to me. So, for example, my grandfather worked on Garden Island during the great effort in World War II to build ships and to maintain ships, and the Japanese miniature submarines that came came into the harbour, and there's stories related to swimming there as well. Of course, during the Great Depression, a lot of our fantastic ocean pools in the northern beaches and in the eastern suburbs and down south were built as public work projects during the Great Depression. And then post World War II, you've got this incredible building boom of municipal pools. So places like Victoria Park that I spoke about a bit earlier, and places like Canterbury Pool and some of the beaches, some of the pools in the western suburbs were built just after World War II when it was mandated that all kids in Sydney needed to learn to swim. And then, of course, during the 1956 Melbourne Olympic Games, Australia suddenly became a force to be reckoned with in the swimming pool. So there was another spate of swimming pools built in the mid-century. You've got things like the bikini wars, where women were not allowed to wear bikinis until the 1960s, and you had beach inspectors wandering around checking that they were in one pieces and not in bikinis. And if you think about, say, the surfer culture and the psychedelic culture and the environmental movement and all these kind of social threads that run through the story of Sydney, many of them are very closely connected to the water and to swimming. So I think swimming's a great prism through which to see Sydney and to look at how we develop and evolve as a society, and to kind of get a sense of what makes us tick as a society.
Yeah, well, I think that's fascinating. And in fact, you used the word prism on Sydney life and culture and history. And I was thinking of the word, it's a great lens, too, to look into these different slices, terribly mixed metaphors. But your book is very much like that. You cover so much fascinating ground that relates to your themes. Talking about personal connections, perhaps, beaches are important in a family sense, and I guess they've been important to you in your family and life. And you've chosen a particular baths as your favourite venue, Wiley's Baths in Coogee.
So Wiley's is just south of Coogee Beach, and it's the grand dame, I think, of Sydney's ocean pools. It was built in 1907. And it was built by the father of a famous Olympian. Her name was Mina Wiley, and her great rival and friend, Fanny Durack, were the first Australian women to ever compete in an Olympic Games in Stockholm in 1912. And they won the gold and silver between them. So it's a great historical venue. They used to swim and train at Wiley's. And as I say, Mina's father was the person that built Wiley's and managed it in its first stages. Yeah, it's this most amazing Edwardian structure with a beautiful boardwalk. It has an incredible vista out to the horizon and out to Wedding Cake Island. Extremely beautiful physical place, a great sense of community. But for me, it's also a very important place personally. When I was a student, I was at the Uni of New South Wales, and I used to go down in between lectures and swim at Wiley's. But I also became great mates with a friend called Joanna, and she lived around the corner from Wiley's, and she used to talk about having an appointment with Dr. Wiley. So we'd go down and we'd swim, and very sadly, Joanna, who was the most amazing person, she was from Brooklyn in New York, a great character. Her language was as salty as the water of Wiley's, and she had traveled the world and was very much a child of the world, but sadly died before her time of an unlucky tumor. And so when we came to say goodbye to Joanna, we decided that we had to have the wake at Wiley's to celebrate her because it was such a special place for her. So for me, Wiley's sums up all that's great about Sydney ocean pools. The history, the story of competitions, great swimmers, the beauty, the underwater animation and the life. Wiley's is clear every day with the tides, and you get octopus and fish and all sorts of sea urchins and amazing life and animation under the water. But there's also a strong personal story that is very much a part of my history. So that's why I think it's special. But we are spoilt for choice in Sydney. I think there are incredible number of places to swim in this city. And I would argue very strongly that Sydney is the most swimmable city in the world. I think when you factor in the ocean pools, the harbour beaches, the Pacific beaches, all the rivers and the places that can be swum, in wild Sydney, up in the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury and the Georges River and further south in the National Park. And then amazing municipal pools, including fantastic facilities right in the middle of the city. I don't think there's a city that rivals Sydney in terms of its swimming venues.
Could pick up on the theme that seems to run through a number of the stories of our great swimmers, if you like, our competitive swimmers, so known to us as part of our culture and identity, from Dawn Fraser and Annette Kellerman before her, and Boy
Mhm.
Charlton. You tell and reference these stories as part of our culture through a number of the venues that you visit too, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. No, a lot of our venues are named after some of the swimming greats. So I mentioned Wiley's Baths, named after Mina Wiley. Fanny Durack has a pool named after her in the Inner West. Andrew Boyd Charlton is just down next to the Domain, a most fantastic venue. Yeah, Dawn Fraser Baths in Balmain, Murray Rose. We have Redleaf Pool, Murray Rose's pool, the Ian Thorpe Aquatic Centre in Ultimo. So a number of people, that were local, and our venues are rightly named in their honour. But there's also some other people that aren't celebrated. Fred Lane was our first Olympic champion, and he was a person that I think spent time in North Sydney and in the Northern Beaches. You mentioned Annette Kellerman. She's someone that maybe we didn't know that much about, although I'm happy to see that there was a book published recently about her, telling her amazing story. She was Australia's $1 million mermaid, and really what we call artistic swimming, or amazing underwater swimming. She was the first person to really kind of popularize that, and then people like Esther Williams followed suit later on during the movies when sound arrived. So we've got a whole lot of people who really are local heroes. And then also there are the most amazing surfing legends, So we have someone like Isabel Lethan that similarly was on the Northern Beaches, and she was credited as the first woman to hop on a surfboard. That's strictly not true, but she was a legend. And likewise, like Annette Kellerman, went over to the US and became a famous swimming teacher. And people like Midget Farrelly, Nat Young, Mark Warrens, Sally Fitzgibbon, Lane Beachley, another Northern Beaches hero. So it's the story of these people as well as the swimmers, and so there's a lot to celebrate in terms of the legends, swimmers and surfers in Sydney and around Sydney.
Yeah, well, your book is certainly a celebration too, not only of the beautiful settings, world-class beautiful settings that we've got for swimming around Sydney, but also the individuals and people and achievement. You mentioned Anna Kellerman, and she was styled as a mermaid. One of the places you visit and write about is the Mermaid Baths at the north end of Bondi, and this leads you into a reflection on climate change even, and looking to the future.
Yeah, so that particular chapter is called The Children, and I found it very poignant. So the little kiddies baths at the north end of Bondi Beach are called the Mermaid Baths. And I guess about 20 years ago now, the mayor of Bondi at the time put up a marker anticipating where rising sea levels would be if we don't do anything to mitigate what's happening with climate change. And effectively, since then, there's been a lot of research and studies done, and they have sadly vindicated that projection. And so, if things continue as they are, a lot of our beaches and a lot of our ocean fronts will be inundated. And so it got me thinking as I was down at the kiddies pool watching the kids splash around and thinking, wow, what's life going to be like for them, in a generation's time if we don't do anything? Will there even be a Bondi Beach, or will sea levels effectively wash away that? And we've seen in the last few years in places like Neilson Park and at Dawn Fraser Pool, certainly around the Collaroy Narrabeen area where the seawall has gone up, that we are needing to do climate change mitigation. And there's been a lot of construction and a lot of money spent to try and mitigate things. So I think it's front and foremost in everyone's mind, but the question is it enough? What can we do to make sure that we can protect these most amazing natural assets that we have on the coast? And so, yeah, that chapter is a reflection on the potential impacts of climate change and what we could be leaving as a legacy for the next generation or two if we don't act with more force and with more commitment to make sure that we abate the worst effects of the climate catastrophe.
Here on Radio Northern Beaches, the program Community Voices, our guest Chris Baker speaking about his collection of 50 essays under the title Swimming Sydney, tales of his visits over the course of a year each week to one of 52 swimming venues around our beautiful city of Sydney and environs. There's so much that you raise in this book. One of the things that you reflect upon from a cultural point of view is perhaps what might be styled the tribal nature of our society and culture here. I'm thinking of your essay on McCallum Pool here at
Mhm.
Cremorne Point, which you call or subtitle Our Pool, and you describe it as the public pool, the free public pool indeed, in the shadow of privilege.
Yeah, that was one of the great discoveries. I didn't know about McCallum Pool until I started going, looking around for pools I hadn't been to. And it's amazing. It's like the ultimate backyard pool with this incredible view across the harbour to the Opera House and the bridge and the bobbing yachts, and surrounded by this most remarkable part of Mossman with these, incredibly beautiful houses. But it's free. And on the day that I went, I pretty much had it to myself. So it's a pretty well kept secret, I think. But it got me thinking about the contradiction of Sydney, that you have this free, most amazing saltwater glorious pool that just feels like you're hopping over the fence of someone's house, a mansion. I felt like I was leaping over the fence into the most privileged sort of neighborhood in Sydney. But yeah, there it is for everyone to use. But then it got me thinking, well, here it is. It's a weekday. I'm here on my own, but who even knows about this pool, and who has the time and luxury to be able to to take time off to go swimming? And so that was a reflection on what Tim Winton calls the C word, which we don't want to discuss very much often in Australian society, and that's the story of class. Who can swim, who can't. And yeah, that also got me thinking too about some of the inequalities within Sydney. So, for example, in the municipality of Randwick in the eastern suburbs, there is twice as many swimming venues as there are in the municipality of Blacktown, but only half the population. So while I think we have the most amazing swimming venues, the riches are not evenly distributed, I think, in society. And, there are some parts of the city that are indeed luckier than others when it comes not just only to the natural assets, but also the built swimming venues. So, yeah, I think we can't not swim without also thinking about class. I mean, certainly there's a great egalitarianism that comes with swimming. And a
Yes.
friend of mine says everyone's equal in a pair of budgie smugglers. And I think there's a great truth to that.
Yep.
And there's a wonderful community that comes from swimming. And I mentioned that including in the chapter on Maroubra Beach, which I call Skin. And I say there's this most amazing equality and egalitarian aspect to being in a beach like Maroubra, where everyone, you have people in all shapes and sizes and all shades of colour. But certainly when it comes to access to the coast, how long it takes for us to access the ocean, the facilities that are available, Sydney's not entirely equal, and some parts of the city are certainly luckier than others.
Well, to take up that theme in a rather parochial sense, in the context of Palm Beach and the essay you write about that, which is styled the film set as the elite playground and a coastal ideal. Of course, accessibility to the beach, like all beaches, is one of the wonderful things, even compared to the freedoms in America. We have to pay to go on most of their
Mm.
beaches. But Palm Beach, you reflect on there, and I guess it's the contrast between the elite playground, is it, but yet the seduction and the beauty of the
Mm.
beaches available to all.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, all our beaches are free. And I was in Europe not that long ago, and in places like Italy, yeah, you got to pay to get on beaches, or at the very least, you've got to, hire a deck chair or an umbrella. And one thing I want to say is that pretty much all the beaches of the 52 swims that I did, I accessed pretty much all of them by public transport. And I wanted to make that point that these beaches can all be, or these swimming venues can all be accessed. You don't necessarily need a car. car. Maybe to get into some of the slightly more distant parts of the Royal National Park or places like that, yeah, a car is welcome. But you can access pretty much all the places in Sydney that I write about via public transport. So that's great. And even though you have these bastions of elitism like Palm Beach, everyone can go there for a day, and you don't even have to pay for parking if you haven't got a car or you can't afford the parking. You can hop on a bus and enjoy them and be part of what I call the movie set, because it's a remarkable place, and it is this most amazing sort of ideal, but it's open to anyone, and with a bit of imagination, a little bit of time on your hands, people can go and enjoy it for free.
And as we wrap up here with Chris Baker, our guest on Community Voices Radio Northern Beaches, his book Swimming Sydney, Chris Baker. Chris, there's a number of beaches on the north side, of course, and we mentioned some of them that you write about. To move along to the sort of more spiritual and speculative and metaphysical side almost, you visit North Curl and you start at the
Hmm.
sacred and the profane, one of
Hmm.
Sydney's most dangerous beaches, and yet somehow you manage to elicit a reflection of a more thoughtful basis.
Yeah, yeah. So that particular beach I was at during Easter. So I guess it's our most significant Christian holiday, and during that period, it's a time when many of us are in churches or reflecting on faith. But at the same time, there's also, yeah, this sort of more profane pleasure that it's often the last gasp of summer, and often a time when we think, okay, we've got a long weekend, let's just enjoy the more hedonistic aspect of life in Sydney, get out into the sun, get out into the surf, enjoy that. So I thought, yeah, Curl was a lovely way of sort of looking at both aspects of Sydney's society. That, we are a people that takes religious values and a sense of life seriously, but at the same time, Sydney is this seductive place, where we basically strip down to next to nothing, and we want to be, we want to be children of the sea. We want to frolic by the water's edge. We want our skin to be kissed by the sun. So I think it's Easter, and that Easter long weekend is a nice opportunity to reflect on that duality that we have at that time of year.
Yeah, and in conclusion, I think you head towards bringing things together when you speculate that our need for water is emotional, and you speculate that in many ways, swimming parallels, I think these are your words, our individual journeys in life, the emotional rise and fall of the tides, and they can cleanse us and refresh us emotionally. Is that a sort of theme, you think, in some of what swimming means for you and is in this book?
Yeah, very much. I think swimming gives us tremendous gifts. I mean, there's the gift of community, and you just have to think about, a backyard Barbie by the pool, or a learn to swim Saturday morning group, kids at nippers, a swim squad, the social clubs. Ocean swimming is the fastest growing outdoor sport at the moment. And there's a reason for that. And I think particularly post-COVID, we have increasingly realized the enormous need and necessity of green space and blue space and connection with nature to calm us down, to renew us. And there's something I think very deeply emotional about the water. If you think about a hard day, often what you do if you've had a rough day at work or a bad time, you might run a bath and you cool yourself down. And I think there's something, we're hardwired towards water. And maybe that's because we start the first 9 months of our life in water. But I think when we're made up of water, as the planet is made up of water, and I love the quote from Arthur C. Clarke that we should call the earth the sea rather than the earth, because most of it is sea rather than land. And so I think we have this very deep, profound connection to the water. And as a result of that, it's a way for us to kind of be what I think is a better sense of ourselves. I think water and swimming, there's been studies that demonstrate that it's good for us in so many ways. But one of the things that I was very intrigued by is this idea that after being in the water, we're calmed, but we're also more altruistic and more reflective. So I think water is healing and water is essential. And that I've really felt that I just can't not be in the water, even on a grim winter's day. There's something about putting on a wetsuit and getting in the sea that's fantastically healing.
Well, thank you very much, Chris Baker, for joining us on Radio Northern Beaches to share with us your eloquence and passion for swimming, as reflected not only in your wonderful participation in this discussion, but also the engaging and insightful essays so readable in your book, Swimming Sydney, A Tale of 52 Swims, published by New South 2024. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. Likewise, it's been great to talk with you. And yeah, thank you for having me on the program.
Australia, the lucky country. We've got meat pies. We've got the world's best beer. But most importantly, top of the list, we've got Radio Northern Beaches 88.7, 90.3. Now hitting the entire world on www.rnb.org.au.